Welcome to the show. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari has restated his administration's commitment to secure the country, insisting that the security and unity of Nigeria is non-negotiable. But then the president also wants Nigerians to be security conscious as he extols the sacrifices of the military. The president was speaking at the launch of the Appeal Fund emblem for the 2020 Armed Forces Remembrance Day celebrations. A correspondent, Ibrahim Adra, reports on this and deliberations of the weekly Federal Executive Council meeting.
The negative impact of strife and conflicts, and demands that as responsible citizens, we must at all times avoid actions that emphasize our differences. There is no doubt that the strength of Nigeria lies in her diversity. It behoves on us, therefore, to engage ourselves in activities and endeavors that feed on our diversity as a source of strength, not weakness. The nation is appreciative of the gallantry and sacrifices of officers and men of our armed forces in the campaign against insurgency and other internal security operations. Peace and security of Nigeria is non-negotiable, and the security agencies must continue to do their work diligently. As a government, we will continue to provide necessary logistical support to ensure that our armed forces operate with the best modern warfare equipment, while at the same time adequately addressing the issues of their welfare.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari. Well, away from security, the federal government has reduced the number and duration of foreign trips for ministers and other categories of government officials as it begins implementation of what it calls cost-saving measure to achieve fiscal prudence. Well, a statement from the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation says the president also removed travel allowances known as Esticode, while he also cut down the number of persons permitted to travel with ministers and other government officials for official trips. The president, however, approved the use of business class for ministers and economy class for lower categories of government officials. Approval for such trips must be sought through the Office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation or the head of the Civil Service of the Federation. The statement reads in part, in a bid to curb leakages and ensure efficiency in the management of resources of government, President Muhammadu Buhari has approved for immediate implementation additional cost-saving measures aimed at instilling financial discipline and prudence, particularly in the area of official travels. The statement adds that only trips that will benefit the country must be embarked upon by the officials, and that ministers and other categories of government officials must not travel more than twice within a quarter of a year, except with the permission of the president. So there you have it. But for more perspectives on President Buhari's approach to cutting cost of governance, we have former Director General of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, Dr. Joe Abbah, joining us from our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us, and beautiful afternoon to you. Now, I know this is something you have, advocated perhaps on a wider scale, but before we get into the wider scale, let's focus on this for a moment. What does this tell you, this new reforms? How do you receive it?
I receive it very warmly. They are not entirely new, though. The restrictions on foreign travel and foreign training have actually been in place since early 2015, even before the Buhari government came in. What is good about this new approach is that it tightens it up a lot more and provides a lot more specificity to it. So the number of times people are allowed to travel in a year, the number of people who are able to travel as part of a contingent, all those are good, that we now have measurable indices that people can use to track travel expenditure. As you quite rightly said, it's been an issue that I've raised consistently for quite a while. If you look at most of the previous budgets, the recurrent budget is often personnel and overheads. The number one item on the overhead budget almost every year is travel, international and local travel, sometimes making up to 20% of the overhead budget. We spend more on travel than we spend on even maintaining government offices. We spend more on travel than we spend on training our staff. We spend more on travel than we spend on stationery and computer consumables. And so it's entirely right that a stronger focus is placed on the necessity of travel and the cost of that travel. So this is an initiative I very much welcome. However, of course, there's a lot more that can be done.
Well, speaking of the much more that can be done, yes, I know it can be mind-boggling when you see some of the figures, that some of his officials spend on travels and, the explanation given. But let's begin to look at, what more can be done. This is obviously not the end of it. So what other areas should we be looking into, to cut costs?
I think there are opportunities to cut costs right across the three tiers of government. Of course, we cannot but mention the cost of our legislature, how much we pay to our legislators, the fact that we have a bicameral government, a bicameral legislature with a Senate and a House of Reps, the fact that we have 109 senators and about 400 plus National Assembly members. So the extent to which we need that many to assure representation is debatable. The cost of running that legislature is also quite large, and we need to look at that. If you then look at the executive, we seem to have doubled the number of agencies and parastatals that we have in the last 8 years or so. Each of these comes with huge costs. And while we did an Orosoy report in 2011 that recommended the scrapping of a number of agencies, the mergers of some, that we should cease funding some others and scrap some outright.
All right.
Not a lot has been done in that regard. We're still creating new agencies every day. We're still funding organizations like the Nigerian Television Authority and the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, who get advert revenue.
Okay, Dr. Abbah.
So the reason why we keep funding them is not clear to me.
Okay, Dr. Abbah, if I may come in now, just to be fair, let's try to balance this. There are some officials, for example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has to, make foreign trips on a regular basis. So there are restrictions in this light, and it's not just him, there are other officials that by the virtue of their job, they have to travel. So do you think it will be fair on them, and how will this work for them?
Well, government doesn't usually behave blindly. If there are reasonable imperatives why someone should travel, then of course the person will make a case, and the secretary to the government or the head of service or the president will consider. So if the Minister of Foreign Affairs has to attend a UN General Assembly meeting, or there's an emergency meeting of the African Union, or there's something like that, then of course exceptions will be made. But on the whole, I still think it's a very good move. You can of course cater for people like the Minister of Foreign Affairs and a few others that their jobs involve a lot more travel. But then you can still stop the majority from abusing the system.
Okay, now one more thing, Dr. Abbah. Now today the attention is on the public service. Tomorrow it might be on politicians and perhaps National Assembly members. So I think at this point, from your perspective, I'd like to know, do you think this is a time for us to begin to have conversation, about cutting costs generally, not just for the public service, but across, the major sectors of this country? Do you think now is perhaps a time to have that conversation?
It absolutely is. I was just reading something before you came online from, I think, the IMF, warning that the world is likely to slide into a recession in the next couple of years. We've designed a constitution that puts primacy on a large state. And we need to think about that again. We need to think about the size of the state we have. We need to think about the size of representation that we have. We need to think about the fact that our constitution promotes sharing and representation beyond productivity and merit. And so, yes, absolutely, I think we need to start to have those conversations. In my view, we can simply no longer afford to run the large state that we've designed. And we need to go back to the basics, think again whether we need a bicameral legislature. A number of countries have now started reducing their legislatures to one house, scrapping their Senate or scrapping the House of Representatives and just having one body to represent the people. A number are looking at reducing the number of agencies. A number are looking at reducing the size of the ministries. So we still have a constitution that says there must be a minister, one from each of the 36 states, at least one from each of the 36 states. I think in the current cabinet, we have about 43 or so ministers. So we need to start to think again as to whether we really need that size of cabinet. So yes, I agree with you. It is time to think very carefully about whether we can afford the size of state we run at the moment.
It is evident that definitely there is room for improvement. But I'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Joe Abbah, a former head of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the program this afternoon.
Thank you so much.